Hello and welcome to another Star Wars: The Old Republic video. This is part 2 of a gearing video that I've been making, talking about different aspects and detailed look into the gearing systems in the game that are appropriate to pretty much every single level in the game. In this video, we're going to take a closer look at how to put together an actual correct set of gear, how the stats are going to be modified depending on what type of gear you're putting on, and then we're going to wrap up with a discussion of level sync so you can understand what's making you so weak and how to overcome it in level synced content. So, how do we actually get the required stats for a set of gear? When you look at the gear you obtain, each piece of gear will have a few stats that will always be on it, and a few stats that will change depending on the piece of gear that drops. I'm only going to focus in this section on the stats that can kind of be changed. So when I say piece of gear, I mean like your head slot, your main hand, or relic. Mastery. Generally, the main way that you're going to tweak mastery is the relic. Focused Retribution allows you to have a 30% chance of gaining additional mastery for a certain amount of time. I generally don't suggest the relics that says on use gain extra mastery. It's got a very long cooldown. It's not as good overall. You can also have augments that give you mastery as well. But again, most of the time the other stats are more valuable to us, so we usually are going to chase something other than mastery. Power, the only way we're going to be modifying our power is going to be through the relic Serendipitous Assault. That gives you a 30% chance to increase power for a certain amount of time. Again, we don't want to use the one that click to use unless it's the same case as for mastery. Endurance, there's really not much to say here. It's pretty fixed, although some niche cases you might want to trade gear that has different endurance values. Tertiary stats, we're going to spend most of our time focusing on these. What are our tertiary stats? Well, I'm going to call them accuracy, alacrity, critical, shield, and absorb. You're only going to find one of these stats on each piece of gear, and you're not going to find these on your bracers or your belt. You're also going to find all of these stats can be impacted by augments. If you're at level 80, your implants are going to be the Legendaries, which have a set bonus attached to them, and you're going to get a fixed stat depending on what set bonus you need. As far as the relics go, for damage classes and healer classes, you're going to be able to affect alacrity, critical, power, and mastery. For the tank classes, you generally want to take the ones that give you a fixed amount of shield or absorb stat. For the rest of your gear and augments, if you have something like a main hand that has accuracy, you can actually continue farming with different combat loot disciplines to get something other than accuracy on that piece of gear. Defense stat, think about it more like power, so it's not really a tertiary stat. It's something that you wear on tank gear instead of getting power stat, but you can modify this by either swapping out tank gear for DPS gear, or you can use readout augments, which give you defense stat, but I would say they're never worth using. I haven't found a single case where I wanted to use readout augments. Stimulants. These are a consumable item that if you have the funds to use, you can put a stimulant on and it'll give you a boost to a couple stats. For PvE, as a damage character, you're generally going to want to use the Proficient Stim, which gives you accuracy and crit, although you can use the Versatile Stim of Mastery and Power, and I would definitely suggest using this one for PvP. As a healer, you can use either one, but the Versatile Stim of Mastery and Power is going to be the more beneficial one. As a tank, if you want to use a tanking specific one, they've got the Fortitude Stim. Otherwise, I'd suggest using the Versatile Stim. Non-moddable versus moddable gear. This is going to make a huge difference on how easy it is to mix and match your gear. A lot of the gear that drops in the game is going to be either moddable or non-moddable. It really just depends on what level you're at, where you're at in the game. The moddable gear will have different components that we can take out and swap around, and the non-moddable gear will just have fixed stats, and you have to farm a whole new piece of gear if you want to change any of the stats on it, other than changing your augment slot. The tertiary stats that we talked about being able to modify, those are only on the enhancement slots of gear, so that's why you don't get that on your bracers or your belt, is there's no enhancement slot. Also, you'll notice that none of the accessories are ever moddable, so you can never modify any of your accessories, they just come as a fixed piece with fixed stats. Alright, let's mention augmenting gear. All gear except for your tactical can be augmented, but it does require a couple of things. First off, you need an augmentation kit. These come in different tiers or power levels. So if you have an augmentation kit MK-11, it's going to be the highest level and you can put any augment in it. If you have an MK-9, you're only able to put augments that are at that level or below. To put in an augmentation kit, it requires a couple things. First off, you're going to have to spend some credits and install it in your piece of gear. This requires either being at an item modification station or paying for the legacy unlock to be able to put this in anywhere in the game. Then you need to put in an augment itself. The augment might be bound to character or it might be bound to legacy. You can pull augments back out to reuse them with other gear or other characters, whereas the augmentation kits are permanently locked in the gear and cannot be pulled out. The highest level augments that are currently in the game come with 3 stats on them, and they're always going to have endurance and power, followed by one of accuracy, alacrity, critical, defense, shield, absorb, or mastery. Okay, so this is recording number who knows how many. Different clothes, different day. What are we going to talk about now? We're going to talk about, in a practical sense, how do we actually put together a set of gear that allows it to hit the stat thresholds? How do we kind of do that math to get there? So what I've done here is I've taken a bunch of moddable gear, and I put pieces of enhancements to represent the tertiary stat that's available on that gear. So you can think that this is non-moddable gear. When you look at one enhancement, you can think of that as like a headpiece with accuracy, and then this one as a headpiece with crit, so on. Right? All moddable gear will take one armoring and one mod, or if it's a weapon, you're going to be putting a hilt or a barrel on. So I've already installed those. We're going to be looking at this from the point of view of a damage class, so we're going to be looking at the tertiary stats in those orders. Primary, we're going to be looking for accuracy first, and then we're going to be looking for alacrity second. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to put on all of my accuracy pieces. Now, you can do the math beforehand, and you can put on just the right number of accuracy pieces, but I'll show you why it can be very helpful to put them all on first. If you're dealing with moddable gear, it can get a little expensive, and there's no need to actually do this. With non-moddable gear, I find that it's much easier to put on all the pieces first. So I've gone ahead and I put on all the pieces that have accuracy, and then now we can put on the pieces that don't have any tertiary stats. As you can see, no enhancements, so that's why there's no tertiary stats there. And then also our legendaries, these are going to be fixed because we're using the ones with the set bonus. None of those happen to have alacrity. And our relics, they don't affect our stats. Alright, so I've gone ahead and put on all my pieces of gear that either have accuracy on them or have a stat that I can't change. So now we're going to look at saying, how am I doing with my thresholds? Accuracy, I've actually gone over by quite a bit here, and our alacrity threshold, we're well below that, so we definitely need to put some more pieces on, as we don't want to be under the threshold, but it's okay to be a little bit over. So how are we going to actually see about doing this? Well, because we're already over on accuracy, the first thing I want to do is I want to swap out pieces with accuracy for pieces that I have that have alacrity. So we had extra accuracy as well as having alacrity on our gloves, on our pants, and on our earpiece. So we're going to be taking some of those off. As you can see, if I take all 3 off, I'm actually below my accuracy threshold. So we want to throw one of those back on. And now we're going to throw on the appropriate alacrity pieces in those other 2 slots and see where our stats hit. So we're still hitting our accuracy threshold. We're not over by much. Our alacrity though, we still haven't hit the threshold. So we've got 2 options here. Either we need to find a way to get our alacrity up to be able to hit that threshold, or we need to start taking off all of our alacrity pieces. So I have 2 ways that I can get my alacrity threshold up. The first way is I still haven't equipped a main hand, and I do happen to have a main hand with alacrity. Let's just for argument's sake say I would have a crit piece on. I'm still not making my threshold here. So if I want to keep my alacrity pieces on, I'm going to need to have enough augments to be able to get there. Thankfully, I do have some alacrity augments. Alright, so I've gone ahead and I've installed those augments that we have, so now our alacrity is very close to that 2200 number I like. That's enough that we don't need to be taking off all but one piece of alacrity gear. So now we've got a balanced set of gear where we managed to hit our most important tertiary stat, accuracy, and we managed to hit our secondary stat of alacrity, and then we put the rest of our points into critical. Now I will point out my critical isn't quite as high as it could be because I actually ran out of critical augments, so I used the mastery augment instead. The critical augment would have been better here, but some augment is better than having no augment in your gear. So again, if you're on a healer class, we would change the order a little bit. We'd start with having our alacrity target first and then putting the rest into critical as we don't need accuracy. And on a tank class, you'd be looking at getting your shield stat first and then putting the rest into absorb. And if your absorb stat is still way too low after augmenting, then you would start removing a little bit of shielding to get a little bit of extra absorb. Alright, so where do we actually obtain this gear that we're looking to get? You're obviously going to get some of this gear throughout your adventures and it's just going to be handed to you, but if you're looking to get the rest of the gear you need to hit your stat thresholds or slightly better gear, there's quite a few different places. If you're not level 80, you can check out my Vendors of SWTOR video on where to buy gear on different vendors at different levels throughout the game. And if you are level 80, you can go look at some of my level 80 guides for the gearing system to be able to figure that out. Now, when it comes to the hide and seek modification vendor for level 80 item modifications, I do have that mentioned in my 7.1 video, but I don't actually have a separate video on how to do that. There are some other great content creators that have guides on that as well. It's pretty simple though. Then we also have crafted gear. So other than level 80, there is the ability to craft gear at different level caps, different tiers throughout the game, and generally that gear is going to be better than what you can get on the vendors. Not always, but generally. The problem with the crafting though is it can take a lot of time and resources to craft that gear. You can also buy it off the GTN though. That can be very expensive, but if you've got more than enough credits, it's a nice way to get a big power boost that's even bigger than what you're getting off of the vendors. Also, augments can only be crafted. They can only be introduced to the GTN by a player crafting them. Story missions, conquest rewards, we covered that in the previous video. Not much to say there. So flashpoints is another great way to keep upgrading your gear. If you're not level 80 though, you're going to hit a cap at a certain point where it can't keep increasing your gear. And if you are level 80, flashpoints and operation bosses are a great way to keep increasing your gear. You're also going to find that there are a bunch of missions available as weekly missions for level 80 that will give you a crate that's usually called some kind of requisition cache, and this is another great way to be upgrading your gear. Tacticals. If we go to the supply section of fleet and we go to the second room over from the edge, here it is on Republic side, here it is on Imperial side, then you'll be able to find this vendor to buy tacticals. These are obtainable starting at level 75. They give you a great set bonus that increases your damage significantly. Then if we go to the next room over in the supply section of fleet, here it is on the Republic side, here it is on the Imperial side, you're going to be able to get all of your level 80 gearing needs, including the legendary implants. Note, you do have to do a quest first and charge this neuro key before you can actually get the droid to show up and buy the legendaries off of them. That is covered in my level 80 gearing guide videos. So just wanted to briefly talk a little bit more about the crafting versus buying gear, as crafting is a great way to obtain gear, especially if you're not at level 80. There's a lot of work that goes into crafting gear, and generally just selling the materials needed to craft stuff is going to be enough funds to be able to buy the gear off the GTN. This is especially true with augments and augmentation kits. So when you're looking to get those augments, you can choose to craft them yourself and learn how to craft the highest level ones, or just sell all those materials and go buy them off the GTN. That's my suggestion. Also, important to note that if you're looking to get augments for yourself, there are the blue, purple, and gold augments, and it's not worth chasing down the gold augments if that means having a slot without an augment on it. It's way more valuable to put the cheaper augment in a slot than to leave it empty waiting for a better augment. Hopefully that explains all the different ways that you need to find gear and how to put together a set of gear, and especially the part about augments, where we get them, how we get them, and is it worth just buying them off the GTN, or which quality of ones should you be buying. Let's talk about level sync now. And why do you actually get weaker? So the level sync system is a little bit weird, but the general idea is it's designed so that when you play older content at a lower level, it's still going to feel just as challenging as all the newer content at a higher level. The idea is that whenever you do any content across the game, your character should kind of feel about the same amount of power. In reality, this is not what happens. So the level sync system says what level you're currently at, what gear and item rating should you have for that level, and then we're going to scale you appropriately based on what power level we think you should have at that level, at that gear rating. So this means that if you have bad gear for your level, you'll feel very, very weak in level scaled content, whereas if you have the best gear available to your level, you're going to feel fairly strong in that content. The frustrating part about this is, let's say that a planet's level cap is level 50, and you're at level 50, and you're wearing gear that's appropriate for level 47, which is the lower end of the planet's level range. Now you're going along, things aren't too hard to kill, you're doing an okay job, and you suddenly level up to level 51. Suddenly you're going to find that enemies are harder to kill, things hit you a little bit harder, and you just don't feel as strong. This is because you've suddenly hit the wall of level scaling, and the way that they've calculated on the back end, you're just going to be a lot weaker than you previously were at level 50. It's frustrating that leveling up can actually make you weaker in the exact same content. Just keep in mind that this is because your gear is not keeping up with your level. Now, companions, they aren't scaled in the same way. They don't have to worry about that quite as much. So your companions' power is affected by two things. First off, your companion influence level, so just bribe the crap out of them. Now, the other area that they do get impacted by you is presence. Now, when we get presence, we get it from a whole bunch of different areas, including datacrons and other areas in our legacy, as well as potentially gear, although they've mainly removed all the source of presence from gear. Most of the bonus presence we get does not get scaled, so this makes companions ridiculously good on level scaled content when you have a high level of presence. So getting that presence stat up through doing your datacrons and doing some other things makes your companions sometimes stronger than you as the primary character. It's immersion breaking, it's roleplay breaking, frustrating, in that regard, but it is still nice and very useful to be like, yeah, I'll just let my companion do most of the work since they're stronger than me anyways. So end of the day, what do you need to know about being stronger in level scaled content? The most important thing to know is as your level scale, you want to increase your item rating as much as possible to make sure that you're not getting weak. And then the other thing to note is that when we're talking about hitting those stat thresholds, if you're unscaled and you look at what your stat thresholds are for things like accuracy, alacrity, critical, shield, absorb, those aren't going to get scaled in level scaled content. They'll use whatever value you have in unscaled content and give you that same percentage in scaled content. For a little while there, they did it differently. Now we're back to that. But your mastery, power, endurance, all that stuff will be scaled accordingly. Also important to note, I guess, is when you're in PvP or when you're scaled up to level 80 content, you're going to find that there's going to be some modifications to your stats as well. So for PvP players, there's no benefit to going to gold augments from what I've been told. They actually don't give you any benefit over the purple augments due to the scaling system, as well as going over that 328 PvP gear doesn't give you any benefit. So there still is some impact on gear in PvP, but it's a very small window compared to the PvE range. Alright, so that was the video on finishing off part 2 about gearing, stats, how to build your gear, all this complicated stuff. But I do have a part 3, which is probably going to be the least watched part out of all of this. This is going to go over every single stat in detail. This is going to talk specifically about how stats work, the different nuance about how the game engine calculates and uses them to determine how much damage you're doing or mitigation you're doing, stuff like that. So there's a lot of different details, and this is very helpful in figuring out why we have certain stat thresholds that change for different classes. So yeah, hope to see you guys in the next video, and as always, have a great day.